Of what is great, one must either be silent or speak with greatness. With greatness. That means cynically and with innocence. Friedrich Nietzsche. Have you ever walked away from a woman and felt like something was missing, but you couldn't quite name what it was? It wasn't your wallet. It wasn't your time. It was your power. As if, in that strange exchange between your smile and her silence, she had measured you, weighed you, and walked away with something you didn't even know you'd given up. And then you ask yourself, how did her silence make her stronger? Why did your every attempt to speak, to charm, to please, only leave you feeling weaker? This isn't about games. This isn't about manipulation or deceit. This is something older, something more primal, more tragic. It's the truth most men never grasp, that women are not outwitted by clever words. They are outwitted by presence. And nature knew this long before either of us ever took our first breath. You see, we were raised in a world that trained men to perform, to speak louder, to dress sharper, to earn more, to say the right lines. But no one told us the truth, that the most seductive, most dangerous power a man can possess is stillness. The kind of stillness that doesn't flinch, the kind that doesn't explain itself, the kind of stillness that sits inside silence like a king watching peasants scream below his balcony. Nature never rewarded appeasement, especially not for those who feed off your desire to be seen, heard, or validated. To nature, the man who has truly mastered himself no longer needs to explain himself, because to explain is to apologize, and a man who apologizes for his very existence will always be ruled by those who don't. Most men think dominance begins with words, that whoever speaks louder, sharper, more confidently wins. But Nietzsche saw it differently. He flipped the idea on its head. True dominance begins when a man no longer needs to speak, because speech, more often than not, is the weapon of the desperate. The man who must convince, must prove, must persuade, has already submitted to the one who simply watches. Nietzsche said, "The voice of beauty speaks softly. It creeps only into the most awakened souls." Let that sink in. If beauty doesn't need to shout, why are you still yelling? If true power whispers, why are you still trying to prove something? Do you really think she falls in love with what you say? The truth is sharper than that. She's observing something else entirely. She's watching what you tolerate, how fast you chase, how much of your control you're willing to give away, just for the fragile hope of being liked. And none of it, not a single part of it, requires words. Let me tell you what nature understood about women long before men ever did. He didn't see women as weak. He saw them as nature's most perfected strategists, fluid, intuitive, masters of the unspoken. Where men rule with structure, muscle, and control, women reign with energy, suggestion, and absence. And that's why men lose, because they try to beat the ocean with a hammer. Then wonder why everything they build gets washed away the second she goes silent. You want to outsmart a woman? Then you must first outgrow the boy still clinging to the hope of being liked. The boy who panics when she pulls away. The one who can't stand stillness, who texts when ignored, who grows angry when disrespected, who starts debates to prove his worth. That boy, he is food for her. But a man, a true Nietzschean man, he does not explain. He does not complain. He does not chase. He withdraws, not to punish, but as a principle. And it's that withdrawal, calm, deliberate, unexplainable, that pulls her inward faster than any word ever could, because in that stillness she cannot decode him. And there is nothing more unsettling to a woman than a man she cannot read. This is the turning point. Not in your words, but in your refusal to play by hers. When you stop reacting to her provocations, when you let her silence stay silent, when her emotional traps don't move you. something frightening begins to shift. Not in you, in her. Because a man who doesn't feel the need to explain himself becomes a mirror that she cannot control. Most women are used to men who crumble at the first flicker of emotional distance. They know what buttons to push, and they push them with precision. Every man who chases, who pleads, who argues, only proves her right, that she's the one holding the power. But the man who sees the game for what it is, and doesn't flinch, doesn't react, the man who lets silence thicken the room without blinking, he becomes unknowable. And in that unknowability, he becomes irresistible. Not because he tried, but because he didn't. Nietzsche once warned, "He who fights with monsters should look to it that he himself does not become a monster." That warning applies just as much to men fighting for attention, fighting to be heard, fighting for control. Every time you react, you become exactly what you were trying to escape, a man enslaved by the need for validation from the outside. But the Übermensch, the highest version of man, is not shaped by the world. He shapes it. And in order to do that, he first must conquer the urge to be understood. Because needing to be understood, that's the addiction of the weak. You want her to understand your pain, your truth, your value. Then you've already lost. She doesn't need to understand you. She needs to feel, deep in her bones, that you do not care whether she does. That is the essence of male sovereignty, not cruelty, not indifference, but the haunting calm of a man with nothing left to prove. A man who has faced his own weakness, devoured it, and come out the other side with silence in his bones. This man can walk away mid-sentence. He can outlast her silence without blinking. He can leave her message unread not as a tactic, but because he no longer seeks to be seen. This is not manipulation. This is liberation. You see, what makes most men predictable is the craving. The craving to fix, to please, to rescue, to win her back. But nature taught us something else. Craving is the mask of slavery, and as long as you crave her attention, her approval, her apology, you are not her equal. You are her subject. Silence is not a strategy. It is the starting line of detachment. And detachment, that is discipline in its highest form. Now imagine the strength it takes to watch her leave and say nothing, to hear the insult and stay calm, to see her test your limits and not even blink. That kind of silence is not emptiness. It's presence, sharpened, refined, weaponized, because when you say nothing, you don't vanish. You become the echo where she is forced to hear her own insecurities, her own projections, her own fears. You become the void where she is finally left alone with herself. And that is the most terrifying place she's ever been, because she's used to being the mirror. But now, for the first time, she sees her reflection in you. To hear her insult you and remain completely unmoved, to watch her push your boundaries just to see if you'll break and not even blink. That kind of silence, it's not absence, it's presence, sharpened into a weapon. Because when you say nothing, you don't disappear. You make her hear everything she's been trying to avoid, her own insecurities, her own projections, her deepest fears. You become the mirrorless void where she can no longer distract herself, a space where she's finally forced to see herself clearly. And that clarity, that's the most disarming experience a woman can face, because she's used to being the mirror, not the reflection. Nietzsche never wrote for the domesticated man. He wrote for the dangerous one, the one who doesn't flinch when solitude presses in, the one who doesn't rush to explain, to soften, or to make others feel comfortable. And yes, that includes women. You don't outsmart a woman through cleverness. You outsmart her by being the one man she can't decode, the one who doesn't respond to her rhythm, the one whose center of gravity is not pulled by her moods. Why does your silence disturb her so deeply? Because it quietly strips her of the control she thought she always had. Over your emotions, over your time, over your attention. Each time you bit your tongue just to keep her calm, every time you tried to reason with the storm she stirred, every time you folded your dignity to avoid the discomfort of a conflict, you were teaching her something. You were teaching her that you feared losing her, that your sense of identity was tied to how she responded, that you'd rather shrink yourself than lose the illusion of peace. And once she knows this, it's never a question of whether she'll test you, only how far she'll go. That you are not afraid to walk away, that chaos no longer moves you, that your peace is not something up for discussion. And when she feels that, something primitive inside her begins to shift, because now, for the first time, she stands before a man who doesn't orbit around her, a man who carries himself like a world unto himself, a world she must earn a place within. And that's the real beginning of power. You want to outsmart her. Let her waste herself trying to break your stillness. Let her twist the conversation. Let her push, provoke, pretend. But you remain silent. You don't reward chaos with justification. You don't meet disrespect with defense. You let her spiral into the space that your silence creates, a space where her own noise becomes unbearable. And when the weight of that silence becomes too much for her to carry, when she finally speaks, you still don't respond to explain. You say only what ends it. One sentence, one truth, one decision. Then you walk. That, as Nietzsche would say, is the will to power. Not in your ability to dominate others, but in mastering yourself so fully that no one else ever can. And hear this well. Women are not your enemy, but neither are they harmless. They are the great testers of your spirit. They'll challenge you in ways nothing else can. And most men, God help them, respond by reverting into boys, emotional, reactive, desperate. But the man who survives this test, who rises through it, is the one who learns to see the pattern, recognizes the game, and refuses to play on her terms. Nietzsche wrote, "The individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe. And that tribe isn't just the world around you. It's every relationship that expects you to conform, to bend, to shrink. The modern man is taught to be soft, to stay expressive, to always communicate, even when he's being ripped apart inside. But strength, true masculine strength, is often quiet. Not because it lacks power, but because it knows that words are often traps. The more you speak, the more you give away. The more you react, the more you surrender control. So what does this mean for you? It means you must burn the blueprint you were handed. You must unlearn the instinct to explain yourself, to fix her emotions, to chase her approval, and instead, you become the mountain. Still, silent, unshakable, a presence so steady it unsettles, a gaze so calm it reveals, a soul so rooted it cannot be played. Now observe what happens when you truly become that mountain. She resists, she escalates, she accuses you of being cold, arrogant, emotionally unavailable. But understand this, these aren't insults, they're confessions. Confessions that her weapons no longer work, that your silence has become the mirror she can no longer distort. And eventually, she speaks again, not to provoke, but to understand. Because the man who doesn't seek her attention becomes the only one whose attention she can't stop craving. And that isn't game, that's nature. When you become unshakable, unreadable, and completely detached from need, something ancient in her stirs. It's not fear, it's not admiration, it's instinct. Because deep down, a woman knows when she stands in the presence of a man who doesn't chase, doesn't fold, doesn't measure himself by her gaze. A man who chooses her not out of lack, but from absolute freedom. And that choice, when it rises from stillness, sovereignty, and self-mastery, becomes the most seductive force she's ever known, not because it begs to be wanted, but because it no longer cares if it is. This is the level nature intended for man. The Übermensch does not react. He is not driven by hunger. He is not trapped by a woman's affection. He stands above, not to rule others, but because he has already conquered himself. And when he finally does speak, it's not to prove, it's to declare. He speaks only when silence has finished its work. And when he walks away, it isn't in bitterness, it's in authority. It is not spoken in anger, it is spoken in authority. But here's the bitter truth most men avoid. The majority will never reach this level. They will keep reacting, keep chasing, keep explaining, because they are addicted to the illusion of being understood. They cling to the fantasy that if they just say the right thing, she will finally see their worth. But the brutal truth, she will only see your worth the moment you no longer need her to. The man who needs absolutely nothing is the one who commands everything. The man who can walk away when every other man begs to stay. That man becomes unforgettable. Nietzsche believed that most people move through life half asleep. They're trapped by the morality of the herd, by the safety of numbers, by the comfort of conformity. But the man who awakens, who sees through emotional traps, sees through the desperate need to explain, and escapes the endless word games, that man steps out of the herd, and once he does, he no longer plays by the rules of comfort. He lives by a different law, the law of truth. And truth, by its very nature, is silent. You want to outsmart any woman, without even saying a word, then become the kind of man who no longer needs to win her, the kind of man who no longer panics when she pulls away, the kind of man who sleeps peacefully through the silence, because he has made peace with his own. And now, here is the paradox. The very moment you stop needing her is the moment she begins to need you. The second you let go of needing an outcome, you become the one she can't stop thinking about. Because in a world drowning in noise, the man who speaks through silence becomes the deepest mystery she can't solve. But don't mistake mystery for manipulation. This silence, it's not some clever mask. It's the final unveiling. It's not a tactic. It's the natural byproduct of becoming who you truly are. And who are you, really? You are not some performer on the stage of her emotions. You are not a slave to her approval. You are not a beggar for her affection. You are, if you choose to be, a force. And forces don't beg. They don't hurry. They don't explain themselves. They simply are. That is what nature has been trying to awaken in you. The dormant fire of your will. The divine inevitability of becoming a man who doesn't move to be seen, but moves because he chooses. You want to outsmart her. Then you must outgrow her influence, because if your silence is secretly filled with tension, she'll sense it. If your distance is merely a tactic, she'll expose it. But if your silence flows from peace, from clarity, from an unshakable resolve that refuses to bend for validation, she will feel that too. And the balance of power shifts instantly. Because now, for the first time, she is no longer managing your emotions. She is confronting her own. And that is where the real war is fought. Not between man and woman, but within yourself. Can you remain still when every part of you wants to react? Can you remain composed when your ego screams to be recognized? Can you walk away, not as a move to win her back, but as a declaration of your worth, with or without her? This is the death of the old self, the self that begged, that needed, that explained. Nietzsche's Übermensch is not an abstract idea. He is a rebirth, a death to the herd, a death to the obedient man who waits for affection to feel alive. Most men believe that if they are good enough, patient enough, understanding enough, they will eventually win her. But Nietzsche knew better. He saw that being good is often the disguise of weakness, that kindness rooted in fear is cowardice, that patience used to avoid loss is nothing more than prolonged slavery. The Übermensch does not love for approval. He loves because it is his nature to give. And when that nature is disrespected, he walks away. No bitterness, no resentment, only awareness. He owes nothing, and that's precisely why he owns everything. The loudest men in the room. They aren't powerful. They're terrified. Terrified of being ignored. Terrified of being forgotten. Terrified that without attention, they are nothing. But the man who sits in silence, calm, still, and unmoved, uninterested in performing, he is the man every woman notices. Not because he tried, but because he didn't. And now, we arrive at the edge of everything, the final test. Because silence means nothing if it's still used to be seen. Power isn't real if it's still meant for performance, and dominance isn't true if it needs an audience. So let me ask you, can you walk through this life without needing to prove you're right? Can you love her without needing her to love you back? Can you lose her without losing yourself? That is the final ascent, the one nature left us no map for, because it cannot be taught, it must be lived. It is the silent revolution of the man who no longer moves from fear, or lust, or loneliness, or guilt. It is the man who has burned to ash every part of himself that bowed for attention. The man who no longer hungers to be chosen, because he has already chosen himself. And when that man stands in front of a woman, she doesn't see a game. She sees a riddle, a mystery that cannot be solved, one that follows her even in his absence. This is the silence that outsmarts her, not because it manipulates, but because it transforms. It is the silence of a man with nothing to hide, nothing to chase, nothing to fear. The silence of a man who could speak, but chooses not to. A man who could beg, but would rather bleed. A man who could react, but simply watches as the world exposes itself. And it is right here, in that stillness, where your greatest strength begins. Not in how loudly you speak, but in how steadily you hold the line. In how you let her come and go without losing your center. In how you refuse to be baited, refuse to be explained, refuse to be lured into performance. You no longer need to be the loudest in the room. You only need to be the last man standing. And the man who stands, without words, without threats, without theatrics, leaves the deepest mark. Because he never tried to impress her. He simply existed, fully, powerfully, silently. So from this moment forward, make your silence sacred. Let it become the temple where your dignity resides. Let it be the air in which your worth breathes freely. And when they test you, let them. When they try to drag you into chaos, watch them. When they attempt to disturb your calm, smile and vanish. Not as punishment, but as a reminder that you are no longer the man who explains himself just to be loved. You are the man who walks away to be free. Now, if this message has stirred something deep inside you, something real, something raw, something unspoken, don't let it stop here. Like, share, subscribe. Dark Psyphoria will explore with you the truths that few people talk about. Please comment, ready, if you are ready for this journey with us, so that this message reaches the millions of men still trapped in the lie that they must be loud to be powerful. We are building a generation of men who no longer bow, who no longer beg, who no longer apologize for simply existing. If you are one of them, I'll see you in the next video. Because the weak chase noise, the strong master silence, and the wise, they choose exactly when to break it. Thank you for watching. Walk your path with quiet strength.